Hi again, class. Welcome back to our Read Aloud channel. We are here for chapter 9 now. So, before we get started, let's go over our questions. Now, remember, in chapter 8, the last thing we heard was that Danny said no to Mrs. Pseudo and Aki to get in that root cellar, and he took off straight toward Hickam, straight towards Ma, right towards all that fire and that smoke, right? So it left us on a really exciting part for chapter 8, now headed into chapter 9. So let's go over our questions first. That way we can think about those while we are listening to the read aloud. That way we can get those answers at the same time and start thinking already about how we want to answer the questions. So here we are. Chapter 9 questions are, first one, describe the scene in the streets as Danny headed toward the hospital. So think about that while we're listening to chapter 9. I'll make sure to give you some clues while I'm reading. Next question asks, why was the Japanese pilot shooting at Danny? So now we know this is something really, really important. A big event, scary event even is about to happen in this chapter. The Japanese pilot is going to shoot at Danny. And this question asks us to answer why. Why do we think, or why do we know? What is it this chapter going to tell us? This is a really good time to use those outstanding and intelligent evidence statements down at the bottom of your worksheet. You could use the author states that the Japanese pilot was shooting at Danny because, or you could use the text states, or it says on page whatever, or it says in chapter 9. That's a really good one right there. So that's a great chance right there for you to use those statements at the bottom of that package, the very bottom, what it says how to start some really good evidence sentences. Next one, chapter 9 question, describe the Japanese pilot and the plane. So you're describing the pilot and you're describing the plane. Remember, complete sentences. And your last question for chapter 9 asks you, how did Danny know that the pilot was Japanese? Really good question. You need to pay attention to really good clues to answer that one, right? Are we ready to get started for chapter 9? I am. I want to know where he goes. Does he go to see Ma? Does he get to her? Starting chapter 9. As Danny hurried past his house, he barely recognized his new neighborhood. Cars sped by. People were running through the streets shouting. A truck rumbled past with a man hanging out the passenger window. He was yelling through a bullhorn. A bullhorn is those big horns like in PE that they use to make your voice louder, like an announcement horn. So there was a man yelling through a bullhorn. All military personnel, report to your posts. We are under attack. We are under attack. This is not a drill. America is under attack by Japan. Military men were rushing out of their front doors, buttoning their uniform shirts as they ran, calling out goodbyes to their wives and children. Take the kids up the cane fields, one yelled. Hide if you have to. I'll find you when this is over. Some of the ladies stood in the doorways and cried. Danny ran across the street to the beach. Through a curtain of smoke across the harbor, Danny could see the planes pummeling the battleships, flying low, firing their guns, and then circling back for another attack. The noises pounded in Danny's ears. Boom, 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 rat-tat-tat, pow. Where was Ma? Was she safe in the hospital? Or were the Japanese trying to blow that up too? How would he get to her? Tears came into Danny's eyes. And then suddenly something appeared through the smoke. One of the planes had peeled away and was heading his way. Danny expected it to loop around and head back to the harbor. But it was coming toward the beach. Straight for Danny. Danny stood there, frozen by fear. He watched as the plane got closer and closer until he could see the pilot. The man looked very young. He had a white rag tied around his head. He wore goggles. His plane had big red circles on both sides. Danny remembered Mrs. Mills' classroom. She had pictures of all the flags of the world lined up. Japan's was a white flag with a red ball in the middle. The red ball was supposed to be the rising sun, Mrs. Mills said. But now all Danny could think of was a ball of fire. There was a terrible roaring sound. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Sand flew up all around Danny. Machine gun fire. Why was this pilot shooting at Danny? Here's the picture for that scene. He's running away. Danny ran across the sand, but there was nowhere to hide. The roar of the plane got louder as Danny ran. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Behind him, there was an explosion so enormous that the ground beneath Danny seemed to rise up. His head smashed against the sand, and then he couldn't see anything at all.